new way to wrap up. So every time I finish a book now, no matter where I am or what I'm doing, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna record my thoughts about it right when I finish it. The first book that I have finished for 2024 was a great one. It was a great one to get the year started. It was light, it was silly, it was really, really adorable. And that was The Second Chance Year by Melissa Weisner. I have a few quotes that I want to read out of it. Melissa Weisner, I don't know if this is her debut. Let's see here. Nope, she's the author of almost half a dozen novels. I've never read any of them, but now I think I want to read more of them. This is the first time I have read anything by her. And again, adorable. It was adorable. So a couple of quotes for you. I really enjoyed the way that she used description, and the main protagonist in this, the female protagonist in this, is a pastry chef. And so a lot of the descriptions and the metaphors and the similes, they all have to do, a lot of the figurative language has to do with sweets and things like that. So she really does a fun job of capturing different images and tying them in a not cheap tricks sort of way to the main characters. You feel like the main character might actually think in this way. So here are a couple of examples. My heart slides sideways like a layer cake on a hot day. When I arrive at my apartment, I flip on a lamp in the corner. I'm not going to say the names that are in this quote because I don't want to give you any spoilers, but it says, when we arrive at my apartment, I flip on a lamp in the corner. So-and-so must think I'm either the world's worst drug mule or I've lost a fight with a powdered donut because every inch of me is covered in flour. It's just a very simple love story about a woman who has a rough year, loses all the things that she thought she needed or wanted in her life, goes to a New Year's Eve party where she meets a fortune teller who helps her turn back time for a year, grants a wish to turn back time to 1 year earlier, so she has a chance to redo all the things in that year that was so terrible for her. And she goes about trying to make different decisions that she thinks will help her lock in the things that she's lost. She wants to do things, not necessarily always the opposite of what she did before, but to do things in a less spontaneous manner. Anyway, she wants to do things in a less spontaneous manner, unlike Lola, who has totally embraced spontaneity. Lola, what are you doing? Anyway, she wants to do things in a less spontaneous manner. She wants to not be so reactive to things. And so she goes about trying to keep her job, keep her boyfriend, keep her sanity, make her parents proud, do the things that are true to her, but that also cause fewer ripples in her life that she knows will lead to all of these different things being lost that she doesn't want to lose. But what she ends up losing instead, she discovers, is way more valuable to her than the things she's trying to keep. It's a lovely, like if you've seen Big, it's a little bit like Big. If you've seen 13 Going on 30, it's a little bit like 13 Going on 30. If you've read or seen A Christmas Carol, it's a little bit like A Christmas Carol. It is just a really lovely, sweet, gentle love story with some time travel and some magic. The characters are really well-rounded. They are lovely. There's an element of found family. It's not the greatest book ever written, but it is absolutely a fun, loving, uplifting, heartwarming, gentle, sweet, funny joy of a book. So this gets top marks for me, and I hope it sets the tone for the rest of my reading for the year, because it was a joy. It was a joy. Second Chance Year, Melissa Weisner. Book 1 down for January, book 1 down for 2024, and it was a good one.
You got some toys. Hi, rabbit girl. Look at that tail. Look at that tail. Yes. Hi, beautiful girl.
Friday night. I'm home from work. I look a total mess, but true to my word, I'm checking in every time I finish a book. And so I have finished Margery Kemp, the book of Margery Kemp. Hi, Lola. It is Friday and someone has been alone all day and she does not want me talking on this camera. Okay, I have finished the book of Margery Kemp. And this book is super weird. This was my classic for the month, the book of Margery Kemp. And I don't know that I've ever read anything like this. I don't even really know what to say about this. It's considered to be the first autobiography in the English language. It was written in the 1400s, dictated to a couple of different people by a medieval woman named Margery Kemp, upper middle class-ish. She was the daughter of like a mayor, and she married this guy and they had some kids, and she tried to be a businesswoman and her businesses failed, and then she started to have like visions and she fell in love with Jesus. She started crying loudly, so loudly all the time that it was so loud that she annoyed whole villages and towns and whole churches, and she annoyed a lot of churches. She annoyed a lot of men. She is constantly terrified of being assaulted in some way, shape, or form by men. I think it was just like telling of the time period and the role that women played in society. Although she does have quite a lot of freedom and autonomy. A lot of that has to do with her husband, but her husband, even though he's a good guy, he's also like not that great. Even the good guys in this are not that great. Even the good women in this are not that great. Even Margery herself is often not that great. She goes on pilgrimages. It was apparently the thing to do at this time. She does she like wears like a hair shirt on her, like over her head and going down her back, like so that she feels pain and discomfort all the time. She does that until God tells her to stop. She has visions of Jesus wearing purple and sitting on her bed. She has visions of thousands and thousands of angels, little white beings all around her that look like dust motes. She hears birds, she hears bells, she hears whooshing sounds. She hears God. God tells her to marry him. She remains a lay woman. She does not ever become a nun or anything like that. She has, despite taking vows of chastity with her husband over and over again, she has 10 or more children. I read some things that said 16. I watched some videos on her as I was reading this as well, and some people were saying 10, some people said 12, some people said 16. I'm not sure. If you can hear squeaking, it's Lola playing with her ball in the hallway. The book is super chaotic. She constantly refers to herself as the creature or this creature. It's weird. It's a weird, mystical, unfathomable, ancient view of one woman's life as she tries to be really holy and live fully in the society she's in without being part of the society she's in. And she has very, very different values from most of the people in her society, and sees the world very differently, and ticks off a lot of people because she's not willing to curb her beliefs or to mellow her presentation of her beliefs in any way. She wears white as a married woman when I guess that she's not really supposed to. She, at one point, she's on a pilgrimage, and some guy who is always referred to as the Hunchback, he has her carry the money. He's like her guide, and he has her carry the money, and she believes she's told to give away all her earthly possessions. So she gives away all his money, and then he is upset about that He's like, what will we do? How will we survive? And she's like, God will provide for us. And then somebody just hands her a 10 something, whatever the coinage was back then. But she travels all over the place. She travels to the Holy Land. She travels to places in Europe. She travels all over the place by boat, by foot, by cart. This woman gets around. At one point, she meets Julian of Norwich. Yeah, it's fascinating. Fascinating, weird, wild, wacky, chaotic, fascinating, really bizarre. Yeah, I might have more to say about it later. I really couldn't not read it. Like, I couldn't stop reading it when I would pick it up, but also it kind of creeps me out. So I'm really glad I read it, and I'm also really glad I'm done. It's a good experience. My first classic, very good. That's it. That's my check-in. That's the book I just finished. Am I about to talk? Who's I talking to? How weird. We've just been hanging out on a Saturday morning, reading and baking an apple pie and generally relaxing. Work started this week and after the holiday, and it was a rough start back. It's so exhausting. So today is just a total chill day, and she has been loving having me home all day again, but I stayed up really late last night. This is Saturday. Yesterday, of course, was Friday. I stayed up really late last night, and I finished several books, and then I finished Jane Eyre just moments ago. So first I finished, I think it's called, I listened to it, I'll put a picture of it here, obviously, but I listened to, I think it's something like 101 essays that will change the way you think, and I'm not remembering who the author is, and I'm actually not really remembering much about the essays either. This was something that I'd had on my Audible TBR for a very long time, and I finally was just like, okay, I'm gonna get through some of these things that have been on my Audible TBR for a very long time. So I turned it on and listened to it. It was great to have it on in the background while doing other things. A lot of these are really stretching to call them essays. Most of them are just lists of things with a little bit of like an annotation, like an annotated list. And a lot of them are trite and a lot of them are repetitive. And I'd say maybe a handful of them made me stop and think, but can I iterate what they made me think about now, just like a week out from it? No. Not at all. This was okay. I'm glad that I gave it a shot. I'm glad that it made me think in the moment occasionally. I'm really glad that it's just done and I don't have to wonder anymore if this is something that would change my life. Yeah, so that's done. Over. I finished another book I've been reading, which is my first in the reread all the Sophie Kinsella standalones goal I have for 2024. So this was my first one that I reread. This is Remember Me. This, I think, is her third standalone. And I read this one. I think I'm going to try and read them mostly in order, publication order, but I read that one first because it's the one I've read the least. I have only read it twice now. My second reading I finished yesterday, and I remembered it the least, so I thought it would feel like a brand new Kinsella to me, and it did. It really did. As I read it, I started to remember the premise, but I couldn't really remember how things played out. And I also realized why I don't really reread this one ever. It's just because it's more, Sophie Kinsella also wrote under a pen name, Madeline Wickham. And I've read two of those books, and the characters are a lot less likable in those books. They're kind of hard, and it's kind of like Sophie Kinsella is Hallmark movie and Madeline Wickham is Lifetime movie. Remember Me the tone is a little bit off because it's a Sophie Kinsella voice with a Madeline Wickham story. And so it doesn't feel quite right. There is a lot of very unlikable characters. There is infidelity. There is just some yuckiness, just some generalized bleh. And there's not a lot of endearing moments. And I never really was, I mean, these are romances, right? So you should be invested in the relationship. And I never was invested in either of the relationships that she's in. I wasn't rooting for either of them to be the big ending. And so, yeah, it's still a fine book. I had a good time reading it. But at the same time, it wasn't what I want it to be. And that's not the book's fault. I think that when I rated it based on what it is, not what I want it to be. And I'm not going to say I'm never going to reread it, because chances are I will. In 10 years, I'll be like, hey, I've only ever read that one twice. I wonder what it's about. And I'll pull it off my shelf again. It's not my favorite, and it's never going to be my favorite. So, but what is my favorite is Jane Eyre. Oh, I think that this was maybe my 20th time reading it. I think, as far as I can tell, as far as I can count back. The very first time I read it, well, I read an abridged version of it when I was in 7th grade. That was given to me by my aunt. And then I read this actual, like, the real Jane Eyre when I was in 9th grade, and several times in 10th and 11th grade. And it's just been a lot of times from there. And as far as I can think back, I think this was my 20th time, my 20th read. And you would be justified in asking if there's any point in reading a book that many times. And I would be justified in saying yes. There is. This was the first time I'd read this Barnes & Noble copy of it, and I went ahead and tabbed it, and I consciously tried to tab things that I don't remember noticing before that struck me this time. And I still have that many tabs. Things that stood out to me this time that I don't really remember standing out to me in the past. And I was reminded yet again, and I think I do this every single time, and I didn't mark it. There's no tab on it. So I think I do this every time. I always forget that Sid gets the last word of this book. All of the movie adaptations, all of the limited series adaptations, they all end with some reader I married him sort of a moment, which is not how the book ends. And I really like that. I really like that the ending still has the power to surprise me, even though I know so very clearly what the ending is. I just adore this book. I adore the writing of it, like the Charlotte Bronte's skill. I enjoy the story behind the creation of it. I enjoy trying to see beyond what's there into the people, the real life people that Charlotte Bronte used to create her characters. I love the little life lessons. I'm trying to think, I love the little life lessons that are in this book. I love the voice and the tenacity of Jane Eyre. I love the conversation that the book has with the reader, beyond the dear reader, or, Charlotte Bronte breaks that fourth wall and has Jane Eyre speak directly to us. Beyond that, the book is having a conversation with you about, well, to go to Bob Dylan, like everything does, the fact that you've got to serve somebody. And Jane Eyre is torn. She's torn between serving her heart and serving her moral ideas, and her heart and her morality don't always align. And that, I think, is a very human thing and a very controversial thing to have based an entire book around when she wrote the book. Also, I would like to also say it's so fresh. It's so wonderfully applicable. It has some, to our lives today, it has some very dated material in it. The book is from the 1830s. I think that it's okay to have some dated ideas. I'm glad to see society has moved past some words, phrases, and preconceived notions. But overall, I just, the preacher is despicable, and the love interest is despicable, and Jane behaves despicably, and yet that's not all they are. They are also wonderful, bright, shining lights, they're very human. The characters are very human, but also very archetypal. It's such a brilliant little piece of work. I love the book. Obviously, I've read it 20 times. I love the book. I know there are people in the world today that don't love the book. I don't understand you. We don't have anything in common, friend. So, love Jane Eyre. Really happy to have started the year rereading it. Whew. As always, I just kind of want to dive into another reread. I just want to start over at the beginning. But I won't. I won't, because there are a lot of other things I'm trying to read. But yay. Yay, yay, yay. Loved my reread of Jane Eyre. And if you haven't read it, or if you haven't reread it in a long time, I strongly suggest that you do. I finished listening to, Paul by N.T. or T.N. something. I don't know. The picture's here. His name is on it. This is a biography of the Apostle Paul. It is not like a religious biography. He's a religious figure, so that plays a role in his story, but it's not overtly religious in any way, shape, or form, this biography. It is something that anyone from any faith can read and get quite a lot out of. It is really well written. It's compelling. It's as much a biography of the time period as it is of the man himself. It's a biography about culture as well, how his Jewish culture really shapes who he is, and also shapes the way in which he tells the Christian story. Super, super fascinating, super interesting. Look at a time and a place and a mode of living and the impact of a major shift in global thought. It's really, really fascinating and very well researched, and most importantly, compellingly written. I really enjoyed listening to this biography and would highly recommend it to any of you. I have also finished on my Kindle The Rom-Commers, an arc of the newest Catherine Center book. I believe it's coming out in June. I received an email early last week saying, "Hey, Catherine Center superfan," which I am. You can get this arc on NetGalley. And so I did. I immediately got it. And I read this book in 2 days and loved every second of it. It is about, I'm going to try not to do spoilers at all. It is about a young 20-something writer, maybe a 30-something writer, screenplay writer, who has given up a huge chunk of her life and most of her dreams because her father suffered a terrible hiking accident, which causes him struggle, physical struggle, emotional struggle, even 10 years later. And she had to give up all of her own plans and dreams in order to be his main caregiver. Their mother is not there, and she has a younger sister, and she wants her younger sister to have the best life she can possibly have. She wants her dad to have the best life he can possibly have. And in order to do that, she sacrifices her own dreams and priorities in favor of serving her family. And her ex-boyfriend from high school, who has remained a friend, works in the film industry in Hollywood. And he called her one day and he's like, you know that playwright, or not playwright, you know that screenwriter that you really love? Well, he has to write a rom-com and he's not doing a very good job of it. Can I hire you to be his ghostwriter? And through a series of events, she ends up accepting the job, only to arrive and discover that the screenwriter has no idea that she's coming, and he's not really interested in having any help whatsoever. And you can see where this is going. She ends up staying, she ends up helping, and they end up helping each other grow into better versions of themselves as they, of course, it's no spoiler, fall in love. And just like Katherine Center always does, she takes something really heavy and she makes it... No. She takes something really heavy and she makes it light, and she takes something that could be really dark and ugly and makes it beautiful, and she does it with such grace, giving such dignity to all of her characters, and I just adore Katherine Center as a writer. I am both overjoyed that I got to read this, and also sad that I don't still have it to look forward to anymore, because I was looking forward to it already. But I have it pre-ordered. My pre-order will stand. It will come to me, and I will read it again, and I will love it again. I may reread the Ark again. It's a great, great little book. Yeah, totally love it. Highly recommend. It's coming out in June. Put it on your list of books that you are anticipating. Hey, just doing a very quick jump in here to say that I finished Bean's Big Book Bash pick. This was good, a little bit hard to understand at times, a little bit boring at times, overall good. I have a whole reading vlog for this, so I'm not going to say anything more about it in this wrap up, but finished, and also finished this one, Ryan Thane's Redemption Bay. This is the second in the Haven Point series. I was gonna try and read the entire Haven Point series. I'm watching my dog try to get something off the kitchen counter. Lola! She just froze. Lola! Thank you, baby. Okay, I'll be right back. Hi, she was trying to get a hair tie off the kitchen counter. So, finished this. This was the second book in the Haven Point series, and I was going to try and read all of them this year, but I think that I really only like the Christmas ones. I loved so much the first one in the series that I read, the Christmas one that I read in December last month, and this one was just okay. Maybe it's because of this particular story, maybe it's because I didn't gel with these characters, maybe it's just because it doesn't take place at Christmas. Maybe I only like the Christmas ones, or maybe I just didn't like the story. Keep saying the same thing over and over again. I'll probably edit part of that out. This was just okay for me. didn't gel with it, felt cheesy. The other one maybe also was cheesy, but it didn't feel cheesy because it was set at Christmas. I think I have a lot more scope for cheese at Christmas time. So this one, this was about Mackenzie and Ben, and it was fine, but it wasn't great. And I'm actually gonna take a pause. I'm not reading this. If you've seen my February TBR, which I've already posted at this point in the month, I don't have a Rayanne Thane on it. I do own the next 3 books in the series. I do plan on reading them this year, but I think I'm gonna hold off and wait until October, November, December time when I'm starting to kind of want to get in the holiday spirit. The 3 that I have left, 2 of them are Christmas ones. So it very well may be that she is the perfect Christmas romance writer for me, but that's it. That's it. Reading this second one showed me that this is truly standalone territory. These are standalones. What holds them together is that they all take place in the same place. And there are a couple of characters that overlap here and there, and I can see how it would be fun to be able to see them, but at the same time, it's not necessary to read them in order, or I think to read them all. So I may just from here on out have found a really favorite Christmas author, and that's it. So that's that. That's the end of this check-in. I'm very close to finishing a few other books, so I'll be back real soon. Okay, let's talk about The Fury. This book was okay. It wasn't great. And I think that a lot of that had to do with the way that Michaelides chose to tell the story. It is this like onion kind of, where you're told the story and then when that part ends, the second part begins and the story is retold with a little bit more information or from a different perspective. Occasionally you're told, actually all of this was a lie. Let me tell you the truth now. That can be fun. That can be fun. But where this went wrong was that I had to know no effort was made. In fact, an effort was made to not allow me as the reader to feel a connection to the main character. And that really made me not care as new information was shared. This just kind of fell flat. And then the title has to do with something important to the storyline that doesn't really get any airtime. It gets like 3 paragraphs of airtime in the whole book. And it's kind of important. So, underdeveloped idea. And yeah, I just feel like maybe this suffered from too much rewrite, too much edit, too much playing with what was a solid idea, Hitchcock-esque idea. The narrator himself reminded me a lot of Nick from The Great Gatsby as far as the way in which the story is unfolding for you. As the reader, it had some things going for it. Setting is really well developed, really great, loved setting, but for the most part, this was not a win. Let's talk about The Hurting Kind, which is a book of poems. Obviously, I read both The Fury and The Hurting Kind in physical format, but I don't have the books with me here at school today, and I wanted to have a different background for you. I know that's not the most beautiful background, but I wanted a different background for you. Change things up a little bit. So I didn't bring the books with me, but I did finish The Hurting Kind this weekend. This is a Monday. I finished The Hurting Kind this weekend, and I had read a good 2/3 of the poems already, so I skimmed through them, reread some of the ones that I liked from when I first started reading the collection, and then read the last few that I hadn't read yet, and it's a solid collection. Limon is the poet, and it's my first collection by her, but I would like to read more poetry by her. These are mainly about grief and loss, big emotion, but in small natural lenses. It's really beautiful. It's really well done, and I wish I had the book with me so I could read a couple of the poems to you. Maybe if I remember to do that when I get home tonight, I will. That was a great book. Really, really liked it. It was a nice pace for a Sunday evening read as well. Let's talk about The Secret Service of Tea and Treason, which I listened to. This was my first 12 in 12 by 12, 12 books in 12 months, recommended by 12 friends. So this was my first of 2024. This was recommended by my friend Samantha. And it was really fun. I liked the first book. I didn't really enjoy the second book all that much. It was fine. And then I loved this one. This one was so much fun. This is about two adversaries. They're both inspectors and they have to work together. And in order to work together, they have to pretend like they're married. And it's just a bunch of crazy chaos. In fact, it's so chaotic in the middle that I just kind of let go and allowed it to just be what it was and didn't try to make any sense of it at all. And that was good. I still probably couldn't give you a play-by-play of what happened in the middle. I know there was a pirate party that they crash, which was super fun. And it's just a great little book. I really enjoyed it. I will definitely reread that one. I may not ever reread the others in the series, but this one gave me hope if there is a fourth. So it was really great. Loved it. Highly recommend. I think you could even just start there with the series and then go back and you might enjoy the other books more. Because I think the first book spent so much time kind of setting up the world and the expectations and the weirdness of like the moving houses and all that stuff. But this one, it just dives straight into the story and I love it. I love it. Let's talk about The Foxwife very quickly because I have a lot of work to do. The Foxwife, I listened to this one too. I got an ARC of the audio from NetGalley. And the ARC is delicious. I absolutely loved it. The narrator was so good. This was my first book by this author. I know that they've written The Ghost Bride, which was pretty popular and a Netflix series was made out of it. And I would like to read that and watch that now. It wasn't on my radar at all before I read The Foxwife. The Foxwife is about two main characters. There's so many characters, but it's about two main characters. One is called Snow, and she is a fox god, but she can appear as a fox or she can appear as a woman. And she is hunting, trailing her lost daughter or vengeance for her lost daughter. And people keep dying in her wake. And she finds herself taking a position as a housemaid at the home of a well-to-do apothecary that has a lot of success with their apothecary shop, but also a family curse. But when she joins their household, things start to get better. And then, for them, and then it also follows Bao, who is an inspector. And he has been hunting fox gods all his life. But he is also just a plain old police officer. And he's called to try to figure out who a woman was who died by freezing in the doorway of a bar in the middle of the night. A couple of weeks prior, they had removed the body. The owner of the shop had removed the body because they knew they hadn't done anything wrong and they didn't want the bad luck and the association with death at their doorstep, literally at their doorstep. So they had snuck the body and buried it thinking that she was just a prostitute. She wouldn't be important to anyone. She could just disappear. But now they think they're being haunted. And they talked to a shaman and asked the shaman, how can we make this haunting go away? And the shaman says, you need to name the ghost and help her cross over. Not exactly, but that's basics. But they have no idea who the girl is. So they hire the inspector to find out who the dead girl was. And these stories intersect. There's so many things that happen in the book. The book is told in such a beautiful, beautiful, meandering, but never boring way. This may be a favorite read of the year. It's so, so good. In fact, I'm just going to call it right now. This is a favorite read of the year. So, The Foxwife. Of the 4 I've just told you about that I finished up this weekend, I highly recommend The Secret Service of Tea and Treason and The Foxwife. And if you like poetry, The Hurting Kind. I can't really recommend The Fury, but yeah, I'm going to get to work now.
Hey Lola, do you want some foods? Lola wants some foods? What about cookie? Hello, Lola want a cookie? Or does Lola want a foods? Or the sock? Hey Lola, Lola. Lola want the foods? Does Lola want the brekkies? Is Lola hungies? Lola hungies? Lola want the foods? You want the foods? You want the hungry foods? Lola want the brekkies? Or the cookies? Does Lola want the cookies? Oh, the brekkies.
The Nature of Fragile Things by Susan Meisner. I picked this up. I read this. I loved this. This is set in San Francisco right before and during and after the San Francisco earthquake. And I've already said in other things, if you watched other videos from me where I talk about this book, before I've read it, I said that I've been wanting to read a Susan Meisner for quite some time. I'd been looking for the right one to start with for me. I had just read a nonfiction about how people come together in times of crisis, and the first chunk of that book was about the San Francisco earthquake and the aftermath of the San Francisco earthquake. And so I picked this one. I was really excited when I realized I didn't pick it because of that, but when I realized that this book took place during that time, I was very excited to read it. I read it. It is about a mail order bride. She's a Scottish woman and she's in New York and she's running away from something, but you don't know what. She's also simultaneously running towards something, and you do know what, kind of. It is a guy in San Francisco who has been widowed and has a daughter to raise and a new business selling insurance starting, and he wants to have a wife to take care of his new daughter and to lend him social credibility as like a homemaker and host and things like that. This is what the ad says. And so he gets a response from our girl, and she goes out there, they meet, they marry, and he takes her to a house that she gets to set up, and he asks her to take care of this child and raise her, and he goes off for days and days at a time selling insurance, canvassing insurance. This is the early 1900s. He has an automobile, which is pretty exciting, and he drives off and is gone for days at a time. And one time he comes back and he's got these little things, and he's like, my cousin Belinda makes hair tonic. We're going to keep the hair tonic down in the basement, but it needs really special, like, curing time and atmosphere. So I'm going to build this wall, and we're going to put them in there, and don't touch them. Don't go in there. Don't disturb the hair tonic as it cures. It's not hair tonic. That's all I'll say. This is a really good book. This is a really, really good book. next book I have on my lap is this beautiful beast. This is Susan Branch's A Fine Romance, Falling in Love with the English Countryside. This is the most special little book. So this is a independently published, I believe. In fact, yes, it is definitely independently published. Art book, diary, in which Susan Meisner hand writes and then shares in scrapbook fashion her trip on the Queen Mary, the Connaught Queen Mary. Yes, the same ocean liner company that owned the Titanic. She and her, well, it tells how she meets her second husband and how their relationship goes, how they get married, and then they skip ahead and they're talking about one of the things that brought them together was that they were both Anglophiles, and they're talking about how they always say they need to go and take this trip because they took a long trip together before, like a month-long trip or something, 2 months before, I think maybe for their honeymoon. And they spend a decade saying how they should go back and do it. This sounds very familiar to myself. In 2016, I took the trip of a lifetime for me. I was so excited. It was the first time I'd ever just gone on vacation, like just to go on vacation. And it was to England, and I had certain things that I wanted to achieve, but I didn't really have a plan, and it was just me, and I was just traveling all over England all by myself and doing my thing and fangirling over authors' houses and just loving every second of it. She fangirls over gardens. Houses too, but mostly gardens. And England has some of the greatest gardens ever. And she has certain ones that she visits over and over, but they had been saying for a decade, we need to do this again. So this time they decided to take a cruise there. They booked on the Queen Mary or the Queen Mary 2. They left from New York and sailed for 7 days into Southampton. And then they rented a car and were off. And they had rented different houses, met up with friends, and just kind of did their own thing. And she records it all. And her big places that she wanted to visit, that they'd planned to visit, were National Trust houses. And there are certain ones related to certain authors that are of interest to her. So she spends a lot of time, in fact, they go twice, to Vita Sackville West's garden, her parents' garden, and they also go to Beatrix Potter's house and garden. They go to Jane Austen's house and the kitchen garden. And there are other little stops along the way, things they plan, things they don't. And it's just a record of that adventure that they have with pictures and paintings. She's an artist that does like seasonal and recipe books in this style that are just as lovely and personal and personable. She just does such a lovely job of sharing the experience in a personal, beautiful, little artistic way. Everything works together for greater meaning, and she has little moments of depth and insight. And it's just a joyful, inviting, uplifting, reassuring in some way kind of comfy read. It took me a while to get through it because I was enjoying it so much, and I just poured over it. There are little asides, little recipes, little quotes, song lyrics. She's always saying what's playing either on the radio or on records. They brought an amazing amount of stuff with them on the Queen Mary, like ridiculous amounts of things, including this really creepy little doll that her husband was given as a child, and he's like a little sailor doll. Super creepy, but he shows up in several pictures because he's not creepy to them. It's just lovely. I loved it, and did make me do a little bit of research on taking a cruise on the Queen Mary to England. And also like made me think about how often I think to myself, well, the next time I go to England, and I've made no steps for the next time I go to England. So, love that book. Love that book. That is a special book. I read Marian Lane and the Midnight Murder by T.A. Wilberg. And this book is tragically underrated. That's what I said on Instagram or Bookstagram. It is tragically underrated. I have never seen anybody talk about this one. I've never heard anybody ooh and ah over this one, and it's so lovely. It's kind of Mrs. Maisel meets Harry Potter meets The Rook, if you've read that series, meets the Cold War. It's so good. There's this bookstore, but the bookstore is a front for a group of investigators who are called upon by the public of London to solve the most curious of crimes. Nobody knows who they are or how they do what they do. They're not a legal group of investigators. They're underground, quite literally underground. And we see the story of one of those investigators who's fairly new to the organization. She's a low-level recruit, and some things start happening that are very suspicious. There's a murder, and she thinks she can solve it. Can she solve it all by herself? Little low-level recruit in the 1950s, a woman. Can she do it? And I think it's okay to say she does. This is the first in a series. It ends on a pretty intense cliffhanger. The story itself gets wrapped up, but the overarching story of like relationships between characters and stuff, that's going to continue on. So there'll be like a little, I don't want to say a mystery. I don't know if it's always a mystery, but there'll be a thing that is the subject of that particular installment in the series. And then there'll be more like long-term stories. This isn't a new idea. I'm sure you're following me. I want to read the second book. I don't know how many books there are in the series or how many books there will be in the series. I'm afraid that there won't be as many books as maybe they originally planned because people aren't talking about this series, and I really, really want them to. This was so good. It's so good. It's really atmospheric. The author does an amazing job of writing setting and action, and yet also developing these kind of quirky, wonderful, little weird 1950s characters, doing these espionage type things using technology. So it's super great, super wonderful. The front is a bookstore. Come on, people. We got to talk about this book. You got to read this book. It's really, really great. Now that I said you got to read it, let's look at it one more time. Marian Lane and the Midnight Murder. It's really good. This one took me the whole month to read, but that's okay. I loved it. This reads like a novel that's very dense. This is Margaret Fuller's Margaret Fuller, A New American Life by Megan Marshall. Margaret Fuller was a mover and a shaker in the Transcendentalist movement in its very earliest of stages. She was a young woman who was raised by a overbearing father and a kind and loving, but a little bit powerless mother. And she was educated at home. Her education was overseen by her very intelligent father, who raised her to be a logician, basically. She had a very sharp mind. He taught her philosophy and writing and thinking and argumentation and debate and all these things that girls were not taught. And then she was sent to like finishing school, the equivalent of an American finishing school, and kind of expected to just get married. That's not the path that she takes. She becomes quite a tempestuous young woman. And this is her story. She gets into a lot of scrapes as an adult. She has some fairly scandalous situations that happen, and then she dies tragically young. It's an amazing story, a woman that we should know more about. I did not always like her as I read this. I really didn't. She's not very likable, but I did always feel for her because part of the reason she's not likable is because she's put in an impossible situation for her lifetime. She's given all this knowledge, all this freedom. She's taught to think and act for herself based on her own logic, and then society anticipates she'll be something completely different and operate in a completely different way, and she's constantly bucking up against that. And she embraces transcendentalism, and transcendentalism is a really, really hard philosophy to live by, especially if you are constantly critiquing yourself and critiquing others, or others are critiquing you. When you are trying to transcend and everybody's pulling you down, it's intense, and she's already an intense personality, and so these things they ignite her life, but this reads like a novel. It's really great. I'm not saying you'll hate her. I just didn't like her a lot of the time. She's not warm and fuzzy, but this is a well-written book. This author has another one called The Peabody Sisters, which I would really like to read. It's another biography of American women, and I don't know who the Peabody Sisters are. I feel like there may be somebody I should know who they are, but I don't. So I would like to read that by this author as well and find out. 5 stars. 5 stars for Margaret Fuller. That was great. I read, in a completely different vein, I read Ruby Spencer's Whiskey Year by Rochelle Billow. This was lovely. This was nice. This is not closed door, very open door. This is a lovely story about a woman who throws a dart at a map as she feels the need for some change. It lands in this tiny little place in Scotland called Thistlecross. So she goes there. She decides to go for a year. She's going to write a cookbook. She's been a food journalist. The author herself is the author of the book has a culinary background, and also a moving from the big city to the small town background herself. She had written in 2014, I think 2014, she wrote a memoir about moving to a farm and like living the simple life. And this is her first, I think this is from 2020, and this is her first novel. And it is about a woman with a culinary background who moves to a small town. The small town happens to be in Scotland. The author's small town was not in Scotland, but that's okay. There's a lot about whiskey in here. There's a lot about food in here. There is a lot of really funny situations because of the small town thing. There's a big American food chain pub that wants to move in. What was it called? It was like the Tartan Bagpipe something or other. It was terrible. It was a terrible name. And at one point, one of the characters is like, that doesn't even make sense. Those are just words strung together. There's some really funny moments in here. The storyline itself is there, and the author has a real charm in her writing, and I enjoyed the plot, the characterization, the small town stuff, even the burgeoning romance. I skimmed over the open door stuff because this is not my thing, and then got to the end and was like, you know what? I've read this story before. This is not in any way an original story, but the author puts her own spin on it. If you enjoy this story but would like the small town girl, the 30-something, the save a town from a big box something coming in, and you prefer closed door, then let me recommend Louise Miller's Late Bloomers Club. Anything by Louise Miller I can recommend. She's got 2 books out now. I hope that she'll put another one out at some point. It's been a while. She is a professional baker, and food features in both of her 2 books. They're both great. But Late Bloomers Club is basically this story, but not set in Scotland. So if it's the Scotland that you want, then pick this one up. But I really enjoyed this. I would probably read this again, maybe listen to it the second time. But if you are a person who prefers a closed door romance, this is not closed door. Very unfortunately, because it would have been like a perfect book for me if it had been. but then it would have not been perfect for someone else. So maybe not unfortunately, but unfortunately for me. It's really, really, keep using that word, but it's true. It's a charming book. Oh, look, through the blinds, you can see the sun is finally coming out. It's 7:35 and the sun is finally rising. Three more, and then this video is done and you watched the whole thing. Good on you. This took the entire month, but this was the first installment in the Cazalet Chronicles. This is Elizabeth Jane Howard's The Light Years. And this sets the scene for the next 4 books in the Light Years, or in the Cazalet Chronicles. It's not quite the war yet. We're in between wars, but it is coming, and it is coming swiftly. The first war affected the male members of the family in very different ways, physically and emotionally, and they're kind of acting out in accordance with those ways. Sometimes they're acting out in good ways, sometimes they're acting out in bad ways. And their experience, of course, alters the experience for all the women and the children in their lives. Most of what is in this particular installment in the series is what I saw already in the miniseries that I watched last summer that prompted me to want to read these books in the first place. So I think in the second one, there'll still be a little bit of overlap. I'll still be familiar with some of the things that are happening, but a couple of the characters are going very different directions than the show showed. And all of them, by the third book, I think, will be in territory that I have no idea what's going to happen. And I look forward to that. Elizabeth Jane Howard's writing is immersive and interesting. It's a little bit Jane Austen-esque in its biting social commentary and wit, although there's less of a near of a lightness to it. There's some very dark things and some characters that are living in very dark places in this series, but at the same time, there's also very many light characters and very many light things and very many happy and joyful things happening. It's very much slice of life. It's very much realistic fiction. And the characters I already know they live in my head. And when I get to the end of that 5th book, I'm going to mourn the loss of them. And I'm only one, very chunky, but one book in. The second book in the Witch Hunt series, the Witch Haven series, which is Witch Hunt by Sasha Payton Smith. This, I think, is just a duology, which kind of makes me sad. This story went places I absolutely never thought or predicted it would go. I love this series, which is so weird for me to say about a YA series. I've talked about this duology in many wrap-ups and TBR videos already, so I won't say too much about it. I can't really say anything about the second book because it is the second and the final in a duology. But the basic premise is that it's the turn of the century New York City, and you have a girl who realizes that she has some powers that she doesn't understand, and then she gets swept away through some funny, weird circumstances to a place called Witch Haven, or Haxa something. I don't remember the name of the school. Haxa Haven Academy. So she gets swept away to Haxa Haven Academy, which is supposed to be like a witch haven, a place where witches can be safe and practice magic and learn magic together. It is a boarding school, but it's kind of, as the story progresses, a little bit more like a prison. There are mysteries. There was a murdered brother. There's a secret society. And it gets pretty rough. There are lots of different murders and scary spells and things like that. In the first book, something is done that causes things in magic to not work in a very dangerous way that they are supposed to. And that solving that and undoing what happens in the first book is a lot about what this book is focused on. It's also focused on the characters' relationships and what will happen to the characters. And even though I wish this series would go on for many more books, it does a great job of wrapping everything up for the reader and in a satisfying way. And then finally, I also read The Life You Long For, Learning to Live from a Heart of Rest by Christy Nockels. Christy Nockels is a Christian music artist and worship leader who also wrote a book, and this reads very much like a memoir. It's the same subject matter as a book I read last year at this time and absolutely loved, which was Rest is Resistance. Absolutely love Rest is Resistance. This is a preachy version of that, but it also reads a little bit like a memoir. So if you are familiar with Christy Nockels and you want to know about her life story and how she let go of the need to live by the skin of her teeth, like to hustle, as a form of feeling saved, I guess, would be the way that I could put it for her story, and embraced instead just a slower way of existing and a more intentional way of being and doing. And you want to know her life story in that, about how she's a musical artist and she gets the diagnosis that she has sudden onset hearing loss, and it's good stuff. It's good stuff. The style of the writing, though, I just didn't gel with very much. It is the same intended outcome as Rest is Resistance from a very different perspective. Different person, different life, different perspective, same message, same meaning, same intention. And for me, I prefer Rest is Resistance, and this one comes second. But I'm sure for many others, they would prefer this. If you are interested in reading about the hows and whys of that deep breath, sigh, release, metaphorically speaking, then I highly suggest you pick them both up. It's great to get multiple perspectives. Even though this didn't really gel with me, it is really important to hear that the message that struck you in one place strikes you in another. That's that. I read so many good books this month. What a great start to the year. In February, we've got 1 million books to read. You've already seen my TBR video. Really looking forward to diving into those. I'm currently starting one right now, which is The Wild Highland Home by Alexandra Rafe. So there's a sneak peek into next month's wrap-up vlog. Thanks for coming along on this ride with me. I am gonna turn this off and just start February. Happy reading. Bye. Let's go read.